We have these precarious situations in banlieue with migrants. We have a lot of state, a lot of structure, a lot of social program, a lot of people working on to control, to try to manage it in different ways, a lot of police. There's a lot of state, an excess of state from one side. And the other side, we don't have social assistance.
Just the absence, yeah.
We don't have, it have absolute absence of all the so we have this inequality. The SS1 is for policy reason, and the other, the absence is just, you don't have utility, we don't have to survey you because you are, in a sense, inoffensive.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga, Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustabia, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello everyone, welcome back to BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. I'm Alex Hochuli in São Paulo, Brazil, and I'm joined today by Fred Lyra, philosopher and musicologist. He's an affiliate to Alameda, and he's from Brazil, but has lived in France for the past 12 years. He's based in Paris and has written widely on France and French crises, which inevitably, if you're writing about France, is what you're writing about. You're writing about crisis. So he's written particularly Brazilian media on France, and I thought we would take the opportunity, and Fred suggested this, in fact, to flash back to 2005 and look at where France has been and come from over the past 20 years. So we're going to be discussing specifically cycles of events in France. It's 20 years since the big riots of 2005, which signaled that something was deeply wrong with the Republic. But what exactly? I think interpretations then blamed everything from racism and discrimination to unemployment and deprivation, the failure of integration in the Republican model, or the failure of the state and public services, cultural factors explaining youth alienation or misbehavior or whatever else. Any number of think pieces and studies, public discourses about what could possibly have led to the eruption in the French banlieues. But there'll be other touch points here I think we should have as well, perhaps even rolling back earlier than 2005, back to 1995, when there was a big general strike, mainly in the public sector, against the reform agenda led by the Prime Minister at the time, Alain Juppé, which constituted the largest social movement in France since May 68. And these series of eruptions have configured French politics really throughout the whole end of history and end of history period. So as well as the 2005 banlieues eruption, of course, you had the terrorist attacks, the Islamist terrorist attacks in 2015 against the offices of Charlie Hebdo, and then at the Bataclan Theater as well. And if we flash forward to 2025, well, a lot has happened. As the French government has proved highly unstable, there's been a new protest movement which has emerged called Bloquons Tout, block everything. And the latest news, and this is something that's happened literally since we planned on discussing this, we were meant to discuss last week, and since then we have more news, which is the new prime minister, which has been installed, Sébastien Lecornu, has quit after only 26 days in office. So although Macron remains president, the prime minister, well, France can't seem to hold on to prime minister for any longer than a very brief period of time. So this is all stuff that we're going to touch on. For listeners who want to know more about what we've done on France in recent times, there's an episode 484 from April where we discussed Marine Le Pen's conviction. And we discussed last year, episode 442, the unique French capacity for disappointment with Nathan Sperber. And we also discussed the elections last year with Charles de Villeneuve. So these are all things you can find in the show notes if you want to check up for more background on this. But I think what we're mainly going to be focusing on is the notion of peripheries, France's dual peripheries, in fact. So Fred, maybe just to start us off, you've written about this phenomenon and an understanding of periphery which diverges between somewhere like France and somewhere like Brazil, where periphery is understood to be the peri-urban periphery, which is something different from what is talked about now in France. So maybe you could tell us a little bit, just to set us up, what the kind of notion of periphery is in France.
Yeah, first, thanks for inviting me, Alex. I hear, as much as I can Bunga cast. There have been a few years, and also your book is very important to many of us. So, and I think France is a special case to try to think and to elaborate around and to situate this idea of the end of history. Because first, I think you have to take seriously, as you guys did, the idea of end of history. It's looking like a joke. It was only ideology, but it's not really the case. It wasn't really the case. Something really happened there to this, as you know, to Fukuyama and many others saying that history is over or something is ending. And the way France lived this period, let's say 89 to, and then you have to find a date where the end of history ends in France, is quite, is important for many reasons. Mainly because, we tend to forget, but France still has the quantity of nuclear bomb in the world. So you have Russia, USA, China, and then France, before UK and before Israel, India, Pakistan, etc. So besides all its weakness or his crisis, he's still playing an important role in geopolitics. But where to date it, and why the concept of peripherisation, where we're going to articulate both, in a sense, in a way, Paulo Arantes, the Brazilian philosopher that your essay, in a sense, present or make a good introduction to the English. I forget the year you published it.
I don't remember. I think it was 2021 or 2022.
Okay, yeah, so it's like 3 or 4 years of it. And also the French geographer, the public intellectual, Christophe Guillouis.
Whom we've discussed many times on this podcast, in fact, both directly in his work or just made reference to his
I don't even
geographical
know if
presentation.
he's well translated in English or people read this guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think increasingly so. I mean, his books have been translated. In fact, I think his latest one called begins something with D. George is reading currently. So that's right, The Dispossessed in English. Yeah.
Yeah, he has another one that came out this year. I haven't read. It's like a romance or some more poetic. So I mean, anyway. So and the big national and strike of 95 that you were talking about is an important moment of the end of history in France. Why? Well, for Brazilian public, I think also you have discussed sometimes this author. For Brazilian public, for Brazilian Marxists, they have this German essayist who is new only in Brazil, a little bit in France now, who is Robert Kurz, who by the time of this general strike in France in 95, I think the beginning of 96, he wrote an essay comparing the situation in Germany and in France. And in a way, he intuitively saw that, okay, you have this big strike, this big national mobilization where they managed to stop the reforms of Juppé and Chirac, etc. But also it was like a sign that there will be the last time that it will happen like this anywhere in the world, in a sense. As you know, it was really the last time where something as big as that in a classical class struggle configuration happened in the world, as massive as it. Everything that came after was like insurrection or riots or mixing of both or only defensive strike, anywhere in France also. Even bigger strike as in 2023, as we can come back, it was an important year, the first semester of 23. Maybe you note and then we come back because many things happened there in the French class struggle. But it was bigger in quantity or even in intensity in 23, but it hasn't the same effects at all because the syndicate, the unions, the organization, they are much, much more weak 20 years now in the present.
Yeah.
20 years ago. The
No, I mean, it's a
organization.
good,
Yeah,
yeah, no, but it's an important point. Yeah, that 90-95 moment actually, in a way, pertained to an earlier age. Something which pertained maybe still to the 1980s, to the era of classes and nations, of class-based organizations and trade unions and things like that. And that sort of mobilization disappears. You still have a lot of mobilization, as we were talking just before recording,
yeah,
in France, kind of a sequence of different types of struggle, of popular eruptions and so on. But they are increasingly, I guess, to use Anton Jaeger's term, hyper political, right? That they don't find kind of determinate vehicles and ways to actually gain political traction. They explode and then disappear. So let's turn now to 2005, because this is the main hook for what we want to talk about here.
yeah.
So it's been 20 years since what happened then was two boys from Clichy-sous-Bois who instinctively ran away from the police and then died in an accident in a power station, which then sparked 3 weeks of the most violent urban riots France had seen in decades, and probably has seen, with maybe the exception of the Gilets Jaunes, but those are quite different events. So anyway, maybe you can remind us a bit about the events, the context, and the responses.
Yeah, this also we can come back because in 2023, 2 years ago, there was even big in intensity, event of the same riot, biggest than 2005, but weak in its effects, in a sense. So we can compare both moments. Periodization in France, maybe anywhere, but in France is very important. We can see very well the movement of the society towards this event, different events. We have the riots in the banlieue, which is the one we remember the most because it was like an immense shock for all around the world. And again, Paul Arantes, the great Brazilian philosopher, I mean, probably the great living intellectual. I think we've made a lot of certitude, but for all this intellectual from around the world. But as far as I know, is the most interesting, and also Riots has the most interesting interpretation of the French riot was made by the Brazilian philosopher because of the way he saw it as a part of the peripherisation of the center. But this is one of the important events in France in 2005, and it happens October to the end of November, a little bit more, a little bit less. So it happened during 3 weeks, but the government, and this is important, extended the state for more weeks to try to stabilize and to create something new in French society. And what is new configurates a lot of where we are now. But let's put it in the side for some minutes. What is the other very important things that happened a few months before in France that we tend to forget, but it was as important as the riots in banlieue, in Clichy-sous-Bois, in Paris banlieue, but after all France banlieue. In May of the same year, we have the referendum of the Lisbon Treaty of the European Union. And France democratically refused it with 55% votes massively against the European Constitution. And it was like statistics and research after shows that this vote was like a very popular vote against the European Union. It was like the labor, I mean, the classical labor class, professors and other functionaries from the state, precarious worker, people from the countryside that saw that it will kill the way they live, etc., etc. Young people. I mean, most part of the people that were affiliated with the French Communist Party at the time, like 98%. Most part of the Socialist Party also. So was quite divided, but something like 55 or 60% votes against. And then, so they refused it, and as France refused this treaty, it was impossible to put it, so they have to put it out and they democratically put another treaties. They put the constitution on, but this time without a referendum, of course.
And it was a coup of sorts, really. It was a sort
Yeah,
of constitutional coup.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a constitutional coup, and as it was against this big state, important state as France, it was like a state coup made coming from at the same time inside the outside, and it was like 6 months before the riots in banlieue. So we have these two major events that's happening at the same time. And both, if we articulate Paul Arantz and Gillet, they are both really important to understand why we can talk as France as a model of one of the models, but an important model of the peripherisation, the changing of the movement of history in capitalism world system. Because from one side, with the referendum, we have this opening to the new institutions that came before the fall of the Berlin Wall, but after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it accelerates everywhere in the world, and then it was like the neoliberal time era, and colonize everything. And in France, this moment was really important, 2005, as it was like the end or the tension with the autonomy of the nation. So it was living by this, and people were against it, but they are imposed to accept this new constitution, this tension inside, this lack of autonomy, in a country where the sovereignty was always something really important since the French Revolution. So in one way, we have this opening, this radical globalization that was imposed to two institutions inside the constitution. And in the other side, we have the radical emergence of this, what they call the fracture of the French society. And in a way that French understand that it could no more be solved in a, let's say, normal way. So it was like French society consciousness that from one side, they lost the sovereignty, and on the other side, society was broken, probably for everyone.
Yeah.
So, but both were movements that have a long history. So, we already talked a little bit of the referendum, but the riots. The first important riot in banlieue, in peri-urban areas in big French city, the first important one that is noted, coincidences are amazing. The first one was 2 months before, or maybe 2 months after, the moment François Mitterrand came in power in 81. And it was like a shock, because you have this in 81, so we have the new hope of the left government that will implant measures, social measures with all this dream. We know that it was anything works. It was a big neoliberal, but the election of Mitterrand was lived as this moment of hope, of some horizon is opening in the institution. But at the same time, the foundation of the society, the law part of the society, most part, the migrants and the descendants, mainly from Africa and from the old French colonies, the plebe, the plebeian of the society. Yeah. They were showing that something wasn't working no more. And little by little, these events of these riots were repeating, and became something common, a social problem, how to manage to work, to control it with the social state, many reform of prison, reform of school, etc., until the radicality of the event was too much. So it was an exceptional, something that was little by little became a routine, small riots located from one day to the other. So in October, November 2005, spread all around France very fast in all the important cities with riots all days, out of control. The police couldn't control it. And then they take this conscience that something wasn't working anymore, and they have to rearrange the state or the society to deal with it. And Paul Arendt's notes something very interesting in how the normality was already a normal, something crazy. But when things go to the extreme, to excess, that's when we discover that the normality was already crazy. And what is the sign? Is in the maximum of, I mean, as is famous, the French people, when they make riots, they burn cars a lot. All days we have this kind of thing, all riots.
Yeah, to the extent that I think a lot of the Anglophone commentary on it is like, oh, that's just a national tradition. You know, it doesn't even, it's kind of has lost even its kind of insurrectionary connotations. It's like, well, that's just something they do.
But that's exactly the point. It lost any connotation because it is exactly a normality. And Paul Arendt showed it very well. Because one of the days in October or beginning November, there is a day when in one single day they burned something like 1,000 cars. Mm-hmm. And then it was the highest point, and day by day we have less and less cars burned. And to the moment we arrived at the normality, the normal curve, and it was like 9 cars per year.
Right.
This was the normality in 2005. It was almost 100 cars by day. This was the normal curve. So a normal day was around 100, a little bit 80, something like this. And then they just discovered that it was already this crazy society where you have like 90 cars burned all around the country per day. Only when it arrived to 1,000, it was unacceptable. And
right.
It never came down since then. So it's still this kind of continuity. This is the normality. And France discovered it at this moment.
Right. So, I mean, one of the big discussion points at the time, I mean, I remember I lived in London at the time, and the observation from the UK, I mean, a lot of the media was filled with discussion really about models of integration, right? That was the discussion. It was not in terms of peripherization or anything like that. It wasn't even necessarily about some deeper problem in kind of the French economy or put into dialogue with developmental concerns. It was really about integration, about the other, right? How do you integrate the other? And it was about models. So it set up UK multiculturalism, which was basically liberal, communitarian, and quite unequal. Again, French republicanism, which was much more unitarian, statist, and secular. And it was really a question of which model is better to integrate immigrants. And the riots in the banlieues were held as evidence of the failure of the Republican model. And I mean, in retrospect, it's funny how central that discussion was, and how, at least from the British perspective, how much the Brits felt like they got things right. You know, that you can't try to hammer the other into the shape of the self, that you can't impose secularism, that you can't ban religious symbols. You have to allow each community to go by its own way and kind of live according to its own mores and customs, as long as they don't infringe on the law. Now, in 2011, there were quite similar urban riots, not to the same intensity, but urban riots in the UK after the police killed a man in Tottenham in North London, which then prompted considerations that, wait, maybe the UK model isn't working. And also, you know, it recalled the Bradford riots of 10 years before that, of 2001, which much more evidently concern matters of integration, racism, and so on. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting to reflect back on those debates in a way, and it shows us a little bit where we are, because for all that so much debate today is culturalized, right? And it's about, I mean, effectively, it's the left positioning itself as the defender of openness, of tolerance, of acceptance, and the right insisting on values, on principle, on kind of cultural homogeneity, etc., which is a quite sterile way to go about things, and it hasn't been kind of productive, and it's certainly been disastrous for the left to merely be the defender of openness without any kind of prospect of integration, of material betterment, of greater equality, etc. So that's been that a very sterile way it's played out. But at the same time, I think we can reflect on what has changed since that moment in 2005, insofar as I don't think anymore the discussions about immigration, integration, and indeed of riots and social struggle is anymore about models of integration. Maybe because society has disintegrated so much further relative to 20 years ago that it's no longer the banlieues as representative of outsiderness, marginality. Large sections of very integrated, previously integrated sections of French society, in fact, probably you could say the heart of French society, themselves have shown themselves to be no longer included, right? So the ranks of the included become ever smaller, and it becomes, kind of better off metropolitans in the big metropolitan centers, and to the exclusion of both the banlieues and of the new peripheral France. But I mean, you've written a very interesting and acute kind of analysis of Christophe Guillet's work, actually across several articles, pointing out and bringing to the fore this notion that, what was once the heart of France is now this kind of new periphery. And even bringing forward this idea that perhaps, I mean, at least according to Guillet, and I wonder what you think of this, because according to Guillet, you have these dual peripheries, but actually the banlieues, because of their proximity to metropolitan centers, whether it's Paris, Lyon, Marseille, Montpellier, Bordeaux, that because of the banlieues in those places, because of their proximity to the center, the engines of growth, they actually are in a way less peripheral, less marginal than the small and medium-sized towns in a lot of kind of forgotten France, which is no longer served by the railways. There's no real kind of railway public service, public transport connections. Many places don't have a cafe anymore, and at best they have just a McDonald's now as the kind of a place for getting together and kind of socializing as a kind of third place, which is neither your work nor your home. So I want how you read his interpretation, his analysis of these kind of two peripheries.
Yeah, that's maybe one of the signs of the complexity of the immense complexity of French situation, is that what we remember always is 2005. Sarkozy, who was the Minister of the Interior at this time, was like bringing colonial laws inside the banlieue to deal with banlieue. So it was like indirectly, Paul Arendt shows it very well, they're indirectly showing that there is a continuation, materiality in the way, material continuation, truly not rhetoric between these eras. So we have what Paulo shows is they have this long connection when laws from invented colony are used in the center, etc. To deal with these people. But this is the people that came from, in a sense, from outside that are here and that have been bringing to work in the industry, all around. There is this situation, this duality of the inside and the outside of the society, because I mean they are inside, this migrant for first or sometimes third generation, etc. So this problem of integration, because exactly in 81 it was supposed to be the time of where these people would be integrated, but the dislocalization, the beginning, the acceleration of globalization and all the beginning of neoliberal reforms end up the process of integration. So the states have to change this orientation to try to control and to try to deal with this kind of, from the capital point of view, the excedent of population. But this is more visible everybody knows it in a sense, that racial hierarchy around this racialization of the past of the colony, how it works how it is distributed in the city. I live in a banlieue which is half white and half, I mean, I'm in a way not that bad migrant from Brazil, but we have this area of the black and Arabs, but it's not hegemony, it's not a dangerous banlieue, etc. But I can see the difference from here to Paris, which is like very close. So this is more evident. What Gillet shows is that we have another side of this process, which is much less evident. But in a sense, people began to discuss it, for example, with the white trash who vote according to Clinton, the people who vote to Trump, and all this resentment, white class all around the world, the other losers of the globalization. And in France, it takes a very interesting configuration also. And that's what Gillet shows, that it complexifies a lot the picture of the social situation. Because what he's showing, okay, we have this banlieue situation, which is more, in a sense, evident. We see it better because the colors of the people are different, so it's easier to see in a sense. But there is a return to a kind of hierarchization inside the white part of the population, which is the majority of the population. Well, okay, it's a white country, that's like this. And it's happening first in the old industrial areas, so close, for example, an important place where many industries have been delocalized for a process now for almost 50 years, 40 years of delocalization. In the north, around Lille, one of the important places for the far right. But what Gillet shows all around his books, but the most important one is Fracture Française, I think it's from 2010. So it was in the middle of debate after this big riots. This is happening all around the country, and more and more areas, big areas. For example, there is this area that cuts all the country. That is called the empty diagonal. We said diagonal, yeah, diagonal.
Yeah, no, I think the empty. Wait, but is that what it is? The empty. Because anyway, it's a whole section of France, kind of a bit to the south, center, southwest sort of thing, which is
But it comes from the north, just before Alsace and down. I mean, a little bit down Lille, Valenciennes, and then Valenciennes, and then it goes almost to Bordeaux, etc. It's like a big diagonal. Almost no one lives there anymore, and you have also this countryside situation, where little by little the state, the society in a sense, is being turning off. So the hospital are closing, the mail, the post mail are closing, the school are closing. So all this old social state that take years, century even, to be built, they are cut off, disintegrated for a big part of this population, where they became without jobs, so they have to work very far from their home, without anything to do in the city, no structure, no bars, no nothing, no possibility to go outside this situation because it's hard to migrate. They have this home, etc. So they have this dissocialization of most part of French territory, and this, as Gillet shows, it was the hurt of the nation, of the French nation.
Hello friends, you've reached the end of a sample from an episode only available to subscribers. We put out 2 episodes a month for free. For access to the rest in its entirety, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive original, exclusive episodes with the entirety of the BungaCast cast. That's George Hoare, myself Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors, Philip Cunliffe, Amber Lee Frost, Catherine Liu, Lee Jones, Alex Gurevich, and Lee Phillips. We've got extended interviews with guests, episodes on current affairs, and original episodes on theory, history, and culture, so as to understand the crises of our times. We also have the BungaCast Reading Club, where Phil, George, and myself present the key books and essays necessary for understanding the world today, how we got here, and where we might be going. Subscribers also get a digital subscription to Damage magazine, with whom we're partnered, and you can find all this info at patreon.com/bungacast. We do hope you'll join us. These are turbulent times, and ideologically confused ones as well. What we try to do is find political clarity, to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.
De A ou pas se taire.